Starts with one knight f3, d5, g3, bishop g4 and b3. Garry, of course, is white, deep blue is black. And this is one of those funny moments. I'm going to mention Yasser Seirawan's comments in Inside Chess, American magazine. Very good one that he edited. Yasser was also a commentator at the match, and yeah, in some ways, maybe from an objective point of view, looking back after 25 years with the benefit of engine analysis, the comments are not so great, but they're from an objective chess point of view, but they're very, very interesting, and I think they're also a very good reflection of how a strong grandmaster without an engine, viewed those matches at the time. Because Yasser said, a moment of great importance this when Garry played b3. Garry was trying to find out what Deep Blue's priorities were in the relationship between bishops and knights. And here he offers Deep Blue the opportunity to trade a bishop for a knight while doubling Garry's pawns. If Deep Blue declines the opportunity, Garry will have discovered that the computer's valuations have placed a high regard for the bishop over knight. And this crucial piece of information becomes a critical factor in the game. So, yeah, and, well, you can understand the logic. The ironic thing, however, is that, from this game, Garry deduced that the Deep Blue put a valuation of the bishop higher than the knight. But actually, the ironic thing is that in many, many positions, Deep Blue was very, very keen on taking the knight on f3. It was actually the human book that was telling Deep Blue, don't take on f3, play something else. So Deep Blue, we'll talk about this, had an extended opening book to cope with situations where it got caught out, and there were weights on the moves in that extended book, and the weights were saying, Deep Blue, don't take on f3, play something else. So in actual fact, you're sort of saying, oh well, this is a machine choice. That was the deduction that everyone around was making. In actual fact, it was a human choice, and I think that's one of the most noticeable things about this second match was that Deep Blue was getting stronger and stronger, and it's really at some stages you start to think, was the human input sometimes also making Deep Blue much weaker than it would have been? Would you, in many situations, could you have just left Deep Blue to itself? And of course, well, that's a reflection of how computer chess is nowadays. So knight d7 was played by Deep Blue. Its weight for that move was -9. Obviously, for a black move, I get the feeling that a lower minus is a weightier move. And bishop takes f3 only had a weight of -6. So Deep Blue could override these values if it wanted, but yeah, no particular reason to do so at this moment. So bishop b2, e6, bishop g2, knight f6, a weight of -19 on this move. So yeah, just following what they say. Castles and c6, again a weight move. This one. There's also bishop d6 and bishop e7, very similar weights actually. It wouldn't have been surprising if Deep Blue had chosen something else from its book, but it played c6. And after d3, bishop d6, and Deep Blue still in its book here. Bishop d6 not the engine's favourite move. Stockfish was looking at, or Dragon rather, was looking at bishop c5. Stockfish looking at bishop e7, but bishop d6 is perfectly fine. And now knight bd2 from Garry. So Garry's just playing his his standard sort of reti here and waiting to see. The interesting thing is that if he played h3, Deep Blue's line was to go takes, and now h5. Indeed, doesn't this look like a modern engine somehow? And well, in actual fact, in a later game, Deep Blue played exactly in this sort of way, and it was shocking to everyone. But already, you know, on the in the first game, Deep Blue was not only happy to exchange off his bishop for a knight, but also happy to move its rook's pawn forward in order to attack the opponent's king side. You know, it's but yeah, you know, as always in these cases, you know, it's just a lot of the human input, you know, really went into steering Deep Blue into other situations. Just one interesting game between Dragon and Stockfish, because e4 is kind of possible. Since yeah, we've got a bishop attacking the pawn on g7. Also the d6 knight bishop is quite loose if you go d takes c4, d takes c4, so e4 is possible. And here the engines are looking to play h5 straight away, knight bd2, h4, which I thought was pretty cool, really. And yeah, the game continues in crazy fashion. It just, you know, again, you just see what engines do nowadays and how aggressively they play. Bishop c7, takes, rook c1. So this is the Dragon against Stockfish. Dragon, yeah, looking to play c4, open up some stuff. c4, bishop a5. Just pinning. I mean, look at this on the black side of Areti. Bishop c3, rook c8, queen c2, h3, establishing that thorn pawn, as King's Crusher calls it. Bishop f1, and then takes and b5. And yeah, I mean, you can just feel the energy in how a modern engine handles this position. You know, really, I was looking at this game thinking, wow, what a game. You know, it's so yeah. But interesting to see that you know, the engines liking h5 in these positions, and well, you're looking at Deep Blue's PVs, principal variations, and yeah, it's liking plans with h5 as well. Well, Garry's knight d2 was cautious, castles, and now h3. And yeah, Deep Blue has a little question there about whether it's going to take on f3. However, not really a choice for it, because bishop h5, that was the book move. So Deep Blue played it. Yeah, that was weight of -23. And bishop f3 had a weight of -5, so yeah, I mean, much heavier weight on bishop h5. So I mean, Deep Blue would have had to have found amazing reasons to take on f3, but it certainly considered it as well. And now yeah, Garry played the move e3 in this position, and this was after this move, Deep Blue was out of book and also out of extended book as well, so it was really on its own here. So the engine's looking at playing c4 here all the time. That's the typical old-fashioned Reti style move. But e3 is all right. I mean, probably the engines think that black's slightly better already, but it's nothing much somehow. So h6 was played. Yeah, h6 is a very reasonable, decent move. Yasser again sort of relates that to the engine's fear of losing its bishop, you know, and wanting to avoid g4 and knight h4. Maybe. But yeah, you know, as we saw, Deep Blue wasn't really too worried about giving up its light squared bishop earlier, so it's not 100% clear. Yeah, e5 is also a possible move, and yeah, that's what the engines were playing. But you know, after c4, they're playing h6 as well. You know, and in order to keep the bishop, makes a lot more sense, of course, when white's gone c4 because you know, the bishop's attacking a loose pawn on d3. But it's not so different to what Deep Blue is doing, and h6 is a perfectly reasonable move. And now Garry's next move was Queen e1. Actually, the engine's also having a look at playing g4, knight h4, and f4 in this position, and then you strike back with e5. But quite a sharp position. The engine's quite like this sort of stuff for black. I must say, with black, I was always slightly nervous when the pawns started rolling like this. Always felt that things might easily go wrong for black, and you might end up being completely squashed. But the engines are not nervous about this at all. So I guess we should probably trust them. But Garry played Queen e1, and here actually you can see in the logs that the operator mistyped it as Queen d1 rather than Queen e1. But anyway, Queen e1. And I think this was a novelty somehow. I don't think Queen e1 had ever been played before. Now an interesting moment, and the engine played Deep Blue played Queen a5. Actually, Deep Blue looked at an awful lot of different moves here. I'm sorry, I'm looking up there from time to time. I've got Deep Blue's logs here, and I've got the game here. So forgive me if I'm looking a little bit odd at times. So yeah, I looked at e5, rook e8, queen c7, queen b8, and then in panic kind of switch move at the last moment and played the move queen a5. So yeah, that was yeah, a little bit of a shock to Garry. Obviously, it's a bit of a strange move, really. Certainly not a move that humans would play. That queen just looks a little bit exposed, maybe threatening something like bishop a3. But it's pretty clear that you can stop that easily, and then you can be attacking the queen later. So not at all a human move. Feng-hsiung said that the reason that it played that was that there was no guidance in Deep Blue's programming to say where you should put the queen. So after this game, Joe, who was doing a lot of the chess code as well, programmer Joe, he wrote some simple code on where the queen should be placed, which I found to be, you know, interesting, but also, yeah, I mean, sort of does show the challenge that Garry was facing, because you know, you could easily, you know, from the first game draw some conclusions about Deep Blue. But yeah, it's actually very easy to change Deep Blue. A little bit of programming, and suddenly Deep Blue will never play a move like Queen a5 again. It's yeah, quite hard to play such a moving target. You know, I think in subsequent matches, human players were, well, obviously knowing that the engines were probably stronger than them, were more cautious in allowing changes to be made to the engine during the match somehow. But here, yeah, you know, little errors like this or little omissions were being corrected on an ongoing basis during the match. So yeah, I mean, this was just simply, there was nothing. Deep Blue looked at a lot of different moves, but there was really nothing to tell it that this might be, you know, a bad move. It was better to keep the queen kind of, you know, behind the pawns in the early middle game. Yeah, the modern engines just want to play something like rook e8, e4, e5, knight h4, a5, making use of the old rook's pawns again. a3, bishop h7, b5, just gaining space on the king's side like that, and yeah, a normal sharp retty game basically. But queen e1, queen a5, a3, stopping bishop a3, and also giving b4. And again, an interesting move here, bishop c7 from Deep Blue. And again, it was a move that came very late in Deep Blue's thinking, interestingly enough. So it was looking at quite a few natural moves, like, for example, just rook e8. But it seemed to dislike a little bit knight h4. which is so actually Deep Blue is anticipating the type of plan that Garry played in the game. It replied g5 just as it replied to Garry's move in the game, and its main line was to take and then play knight e4 in this position. Now, quite a nice little discovered attack. If queen e1, then actually knight f6 check just wins, because if you go king g7 attacking the knight, well, I can take on e8 or take on h5 before recapturing the queen. So just winning a piece there, or more. Black's got to go queen d8, and now you play knight d6, queen d6, knight f3. And, well, to be honest, that's not so bad for Black, but Deep Blue obviously decided, with a little bit of a sort of a panic switch at the end, that it could get maybe an even better version by playing bishop c7, getting the bishop out of the way of that attack, and also protecting the queen on a5. From a human perspective, it looks like a bad move. Yasser says, a bad move that simply cuts off the black queen's retreat and wastes the tempo. Danny King, in his book, says, horrible. There was no need to retreat the bishop, and anyway, why block the queen's route back to safety? These last two moves augur badly for the match. Strategically, Deep Blue is showing poor sense. This was written, of course, ongoing during the match, and brought out. The book was brought out immediately after the match. But yeah, I mean, in principle, it's not a great move. It's rather inharmonious, and the queen is rather short of squares. But yeah, it's not out of squares, which. Kind of for an engine is all that matters. But yeah, it's not a great move. But I mean, what Garry says. I mean, I think commentators were very much into the sense of, Deep Blue is playing badly, ugly moves. So Garry must be much better. But of course, Garry's only playing on the first three ranks here, not really doing very much. So the advantage that you get is not as large as if you were playing a mainline e4 opening where every tempo matters. And Garry realised this very well. He was sort of saying that Deep Blue was playing strangely, but because I played so cautiously and passively, I didn't have a very large advantage at all. It was just that Deep Blue had played a little oddly. But I think that human commentators tended to overestimate the value of all that. Now, Garry played knight h4 in this position, which was actually obviously a plan that the Deep Blue had anticipated in previous lines. Deep Blue was expecting b4, and this is also what the engines want. Queen a4, and now knight b3. And I mean, the idea is you've got ideas like taking on f6, and followed by knight c5, for example, if knight takes f6. And this queen on a4 is going to get, rather short of squares. Let me just give you an example. This is Stockfish against Dragon, where Stockfish played a really nice game. A lot of draws, but this one was actually a win here. So bishop g6, bishop takes f6, g takes f6 to keep the knight on protecting c5. Queen d2, rook d8, knight f d4. And then f4 here, and I mean the queen is on a4. It's safe-ish, but it's not. It's a little bit out of play, and Stockfish just takes the opportunity to, to advance all over the board. This is quite a neat little move, just stopping Black from ever playing c5, chasing the knight away. So c takes b5. Queen is also now completely cut off, and now f5 hitting the bishop. Bishop h7 and queen e2. Coming round to here, bishop e5 played, consolidating the king side. Queen h5, king g7, king h1, knight f8, and now a lovely move from Stockfish, rook f4. Really nice move. We're threatening knight e6, actually, winning the queen. Also threatening rook g4. And after bishop f4, I forced Dragon to play this. Then g takes f4, and the king's gone to h1, so we're getting in rook g1 here. So e takes f5, rook g1, bishop g6, knight f5, takes, knight g6, bishop f3, and we're just coming in with bishop h5 takes g6. And that black queen on a4 is still way out of play. Really lovely game. Oh, this was actually Stockfish against Leela, not Stockfish against Dragon. I'm sorry, Stockfish against Leela. Poor Leela. So yeah, kind of interesting. But b4, also Deep Blue's expectation was definitely better. Yeah, trying to make something of that queen on a5. But Garry was thinking more about a slow attack against the black king, so he played knight h4 in that position. Knight h2 was suggested by Ron Henley, and it gets Yasser Seirawan's seal of approval. The engine's not particularly impressed with it. Queen c5, rook c1 and e5 is what they want. Yeah, what can you say? Pretty reasonable for black as well. Again, white's got a lot of possibilities, and black's played a little bit oddly, but yeah, with only playing on the first 3 ranks, it's going to take a while before you're hitting the black position. So knight h4 was played, and now Deep Blue played the move g5, which got a horrible from everyone. A terrible positional concession, says Yasser. I have to say that looking at this 25 years later, and with the benefit of many engine games and all that, it doesn't look so bad. You just you're gaining space. Yeah, you're creating some weaknesses, but it doesn't look completely horrible. What it does remind me of is that I reviewed an excellent book by Sergei Tivyakov recently, published by New in Chess, and he gives us some sort of Italian game Lopez position, where again black played g5, and the engines recommend g5 and actually give black a slight advantage even. And but Sergei says that yes, it's all very well, the engine saying that this is slightly better for black, but in the long term, the weaknesses, a human finds that hard to cope, to play with the accuracy required, not to let those weaknesses become a problem. And I think that is from a human point of view, these sort of moves are pretty risky and can very easily become mistakes. But objectively, black is well placed enough to be able to deal with any weaknesses that result, and the space that black is gaining is also a pretty powerful thing. Feng-hsiung said that a massive redesign of the king's safety evaluation logic took place during the last 2 months of chip design with the help of the auto-tuning evaluation tool. And the redesign positively influenced Deep Blue's playing games 5 and 6 of the match. Undoubtedly, it altered the course of other games at one point or another, for better or for worse. Actually, we'll talk about this later, but it seems that Deep Blue was kind of maybe having some slight problem balancing the king safety of its king and the opponent's king as well, where it had the chance to weaken the opponent's king. Sometimes that made it choose somewhat riskier moves. So very, very interesting, but not a bad move at all. And actually, it was also Dragon's choice in the game as well when I played my engine games. So yeah, not bad. Actually, funnily enough, again, this was a late choice. Quite interesting. Queen c5 was where Deep Blue started out before moving on to g5. So knight f3 and now e5. Garry said, I played so cautiously I wasn't in position to take advantage of Deep Blue's weakening moves. Yasser points out the weakness of the f5 square and says, in defense of Deep Blue, it must be that it's far outside of the computer's horizon to realize that white will one day maneuver a knight to the f5 square. Yeah, again, I think what you do hear of this is certainly from Yasser is a lot of underestimation of the engine's capabilities. I mean, it might be just beyond its horizon to realise that's a weak square, or it might realise that it stands strong enough that f5 should never become an issue. It's but yeah, I mean, it's hard to know how Deep Blue viewed this somehow. But in principle, black's position is absolutely fine. Black has a lot of space. Yes, a weakness, and yes, something you have to watch out for. But in principle, a decent position. E5 played. The engines were looking at Queen B6 an awful lot, just getting the queen out of the possible firing line. But E5 is pretty decent. e4. Yeah, once again, you know, the engine's again looking at playing b4 and now c4 in actual fact. But yeah, you know, white stands quite nicely. You know, white's going to play e4 afterwards, try and close up the centre. So that's quite a nice little plan. But black's not in amazing trouble. You keep some central tension here, and somehow try and get that queen free. You know, you'll play b5, queen a6 back, and then play a5 afterwards. You'll be fine. So e4 played by Garry, and now rook e8. And now knight h2. So, yeah, what is Garry aiming for? Well, lots of different ideas, but this knight is basically coming round to f1 to e3, or maybe even g4 would be possible. Round to e3 or g4, just attacking the king side. So it's quite a nice multi-purpose move. The engines, yeah, had a lot of different choices here. I think queen c5 was the main line that the engines wanted, just to bring the queen back in contact with the rest of the king side. And after rook c1, something, well, either like queen d6, for example, or just a5. And the engines thought the black was pretty okay there. So, you know, you're just going to play at some stage bishop g6, rook d8, b5, king g7, those sort of moves. Solid. D takes c4, you know, also would be possible, takes and rook d8. But queen b6 was sort of possible, not bad. Queen c1 from Garry here, and what is Garry doing? Well, he wants to route a knight round f1 to e3, so he's looking to go rook e1 and then go knight f1 to e3. Also, that queen on c1 is sort of eyeing the g5 and h6 pawns. So from that point of view, it's quite a sneaky little move. Now, I think I'm right in saying, just having a look at the logs here, that knight g4 was what Deep Blue was looking at, and this was also the main engine move. Actually, what the engines want is to play a slightly surprising bishop takes g4. H takes g4 and a5, and yeah, really just you know, give away that f5 square, but you know, just have a real clamp on the white king side. Not totally natural to me, this sort of continuation, but the engines don't see a problem for black at all here. Deep Blue's line was to take on g4 with a knight. Takes, bishop d5, which is something, you know, suddenly going to get quite interesting and sharp. And now bishop h3 was Deep Blue's line, knight c4, and queen g6 is what the engines want. Deep Blue's queen a6 is met by queen e4. Actually, Deep Blue was getting into this somehow, and this is a nice move. Exchange sacrifice, also threatening bishop b7 here, and if you play a move like knight f6 at whatever stage, then queen g6 check is the key. So yeah, I mean, bishop f1, rook a d8. This was Deep Blue's line, and now Deep Blue's line continues with bishop b7, but the engines want to play just simply f4 and blast open that king side, and white's completely winning. So yeah, quite interesting. You know, it's quite interesting to see. You know, some lines Deep Blue is seeing, but you know, also falling short at some moments compared to modern engines. But definitely gives you a feeling of stuff being you know, coming along somehow. So a5 played, rook e1, and now bishop d6. A decent move from Deep Blue. Plenty of other stuff. Queen c5 was chosen by Dragon. Bishop g6 was also a major choice, but afterwards followed by bishop d6 to c5. So yeah, bishop d6, pretty good idea there. Knight df1, and now d takes c4. Yeah, I mean, the engines were maybe not taking on c4 immediately, maybe playing bishop c5 first, But after moves like knight e3, then they were taking on e4. So, you know, it's just sort of the Engines really feel that taking on e4 is going to happen at some stage. And you know, I mean, it's fine for black. It's not really easy to see how much you're going to gain from keeping the tension. The knight on e3 will attack the pawn on d5, so at some stage d takes c4 is going to be necessary. And when you go d takes c4, d4, you open up the d file, which, you know, is going to be more black's fun line at the moment than white. So, you know, completely reasonable move there. So bishop c5 played. Yeah, bishop f8 was also something the Engines were reasonably interested in, followed by a4 or g4, bishop g6, knight g3, bishop c5. Plenty of opportunities there. Bishop c5 looks very nice to me, just hitting the pawn on f2 there. Knight to e3, and then rook a d8. And yeah, I mean, you know, the position is basically pretty equal here. You know, there is that weakness on f5, which for a human player would be continually worrying. I mean, you know, basically whatever plan you come up with, you've always got to keep on thinking, oh, that f5 square, you know, is that going to prove a problem somewhere? But, you know, for an engine that can do that sort of stuff easily, there's no immediate exploitation of that f5 square. And, you know, if you play a bishop to g6 and then the knight comes to f5, you could always take it at some stage. Why get a pawn on f5? Yeah, not necessarily amazing. So, yeah, nothing in particular for black to worry about. But now we got a really interesting moment in the match, because knight f1 was played by Garry, and here Deep Blue played a very interesting move. It played the move g4. And actually, the Engines were giving black a slight advantage before this move. Yeah, a bit more space simply. But after g4, the evaluation goes to 0.93 for white. So, you know, pretty big advantage there. I mean, there's 2 points to it. I mean, first of all, g4 is you know, weakening the pawn cover in front of the king, and secondly, also opening up that c1 h6 diagonal for the queen against the king. So Feng-hsiung says something interesting there. He says the move was the result of a bug we had introduced just before the rematch. An automatic tuning run for the evaluation function showed us that the weighting for one class of king safety should be increased. Deep Blue appeared to play better, and we left the new weights in. What we did not realise was that in extreme cases the new weights reached the maximum allowed value and became saturated. In other words, Deep Blue no longer distinguished between a very bad position and an even worse position. Tossing away the g-file pawn meant nothing to Deep Blue as long as it eliminated Garry's h-pawn. We found the bug only after the game 4 when a similar problem showed up. In both cases it was far from certain that the moves were bad. Now, I don't really understand what Feng-hsiung wrote there, but I think interpreting it, especially that last comment he makes about tossing away the g-file pawn meant nothing to Deep Blue as long as it eliminated Garry's h-pawn. I think that that means that Deep Blue was saying, well, I like, I'm evaluating king safety, I like making the opponent's king less safe. In those circumstances, it wasn't really looking much anymore at its own king safety. So the idea that it's weakening the opponent's king, but it's making even more weaknesses of its own king, that didn't really come into the equation. That's why it wasn't afraid to play a move like g4, which is weakening its own king so much. It thought, yeah, but I am actually weakening the opponent's king much more. Yeah, all the human grandmasters hated, of course. Yasser says, "Oh my, this ultra-aggressive move came as a real surprise." The problem is that in trying to open the game, Deep Blue has weakened its own pawn structure, causing a lot of long-term damage. And Daniel King says, "I take everything I said about Deep Blue over the past few moves. This is ugly." Having achieved a respectable position, it throws it away with this rash and unnecessary push. Very human reaction there, a correct reaction, of course, but it's not as bad as all that. And the one thing that you do need from now on, though, is really dynamic play. because if you're not dynamic, if you just sort of stop now, then yeah, those weaknesses will really tell. So h takes g4. Actually, the engines don't want that to happen. They wanted the move knight d2 to come in with knight c4 as well, gain a tempo that way. And actually, what they were looking at here was bishop g6, hg, takes, knight g4, rook e2, a4, rook b1, h5. I mean, it's really, you know, a lot's happening. You know, black's got a lot of play here. Obviously, stuff like knight c5 is happening, queen a6. A lot of weaknesses, of course, in this way, but still very dynamic. After hg, the engines don't think things are this bad. Knight takes g4. And now Garry seems to have thought a very long time here. Before playing the move f3, because the deep blue log is pretty huge. I mean, again, this is here. You see a lot of limitations of human grandmasters from the time, and yeah, interesting to me because I was professional at the time as well, and yeah, I imagine that I had the same sort of instincts and shortcomings. Yeah, I mean, the human grandmasters all saying, yeah, knight e3, bishop e6, and you know, white is just better here. You know, just the black king is awful. But yeah, that's not really what the engines are looking for. You know, they're not going to play bishop e6. They're going to play knight f6. Why not keep the bishop active on g4? If takes knight g4, well, f2 is gone. So just keep the pieces super active there. What is white going to do here? Bishop c3, for example, similar to what Garry did in the game. Just king h7, and you know, we're looking to go rook g8 and h5 to h4. Yeah, you know, it's just super active there. You know, and you just keep on going in that way. And of course, you know, the f5 square looks horrible, but as long as your pieces are pummeling away at white's position, it's not going to make a big impact. Another idea: rook b1, king h7. Yeah, b4. We just take. We go bishop d4. We don't retreat. You know, just keep on going with that position, and it's not really that bad for black at all. Just looks a bit ugly, and yeah, just got to watch out when choosing plans. I mean, actually, the engines wanted a slightly more subtle move: bishop f3, knight f6, king g2, just sort of getting out of this pressure, and then yeah, looking later to take on g4. And of course, h6 is weak. And by playing this move, king g2, it's what we said in Silicon Road to Chess Improvement. Use the space to the right of the opponent's of your own king. Yeah, the rook's getting ready to come to h1. That would have been a pretty strong move, bishop f3. But after f3, takes. Lost some evaluation, 0.67, but yeah, you know, still a nice position for white. Now, probably a move that that all the human players really liked, and it was very impressive, to be honest. And it's this move, bishop e7. Quite unnatural in a way to remove the pressure on the long diagonal, but this bishop is actually coming around to g5, so sort of restating that pressure against e3, and actually also covering the black king side by protecting h6 and yeah, and attacking the queen along the long diagonal. So actually a really nice move, and Yasser calls it a brilliant and surprising repositioning of the bishop. And yeah, you know, I mean, this is actually very typical of modern engines as well. You know, it was one of the things that Natasha and I really noticed about AlphaZero when doing the book Game Changer, that it was AlphaZero was not really waiting for its pieces to be chased away before regrouping them. If it felt that a piece had achieved as much as it could on another post, it was always recycling the pieces and then moving it to new, fresher posts. And this bishop e7 is a very nice example of that. So Garry played king h1, bishop g5, and now the move rook e2 from Garry. Interesting little idea. yeah, I mean, you're trying to get out of the pin on the knight by playing the move queen g1, and then after you go queen g1, you'll go knight f5, get the knight onto f5, and you can also offer the exchange of queens. I'm sure that Garry liked the idea of playing this rook e2 queen g1 just because you'd also be offering the exchange of queens after, and he felt Garry felt, well, I'd have a nice quiet time exploiting my advantage in the endgame. Also, maybe was thinking back to the first match where Deep Blue had a clear bias to not exchanging the queens, which I don't think existed in this match. Queen d2 was the other way to do it, and then to move the queen either to e2 or to f2 there. But rook e2 is quite interesting. But I don't think that Garry had seen Deep Blue's nest sequence, and well, Garry said that it elicited an audible gasp in the audience when Deep Blue did it. The first time an engine move had really just elicited this sort of absolute amazement from an audience. Because Deep Blue played a4, b4, and Yasser says that White is ready to cash in with all the positional gains he's made. Well, queen e1 as well as possible, queen g1, and then knight f5. But most experts were now predicting a merciless victory for Kasparov. But Deep Blue came out with something that it had seen, I think, for quite some time. f5. Whack. What a move! That's a lovely move. So e takes f5 and now e4. Yeah, you didn't necessarily have to take on f5, by the way. The engine's also pointing out the move queen e1, fe, followed by knight c4. A nice resource that nobody else has ever pointed out. Takes rook a6. And then the idea is that if you go knight f6, we go knight e5 and just sacrifice the exchange. It is unbelievably sharp. Rook d2, f4. We go knight takes e4. This is all Stockfish Dragon, lots and lots of games. Queen e2 here. F takes g5, rook c2. So White's got two pieces and for the rook, two bishops as well. But somehow not very easy to get free here. Takes bishop e2, bishop e3, rook c2, and well, the knight on e5 is hanging. Actually, the best that the engine thought was this thing. We take on g3. Still feels a little bit awkward with that passed h pawn for White, but the engines felt that this was going to end up as a draw. Maybe some move like bishop d3 is sensible, actually, just to block the bishop, and then that gives you the ability to move the king out to take it. So yeah, e takes f5, not the only move. But Garry took on f5 and now e4. This was Deep Blue's idea. And the whole board is on fire now. So Deep Blue was expecting all of this. f4. Yeah, bishop takes f4 was what Yasser was expecting. He thought this was dangerous for White. That's a bit of a weird conclusion, I feel. But Yasser's always been a grab the material and believe in the defensive chances kind of guy. Yeah, and yeah, that often works. I remember I analysed at times with Luke McShane, and he was very similar in actual fact to Yasser. Very much take the material and survive all the time. And I found him very hard to understand, to be honest. Not that I was always winning our analytical battles. He was an unbelievable defender, but I could just never imagine that he could even think of defending some of the positions he was happy to defend. So yeah, it just shows us all sorts in Grandmaster chess. But yeah, Garry had prepared the move Queen G1 in this position, which is also very strong, looking for some discovered attacks. And here, the engines want to play Queen D2. And then Queen C3, which is also a very quick way of getting to that long diagonal, and yeah, just completely lost for Black there. So Bishop E2 was played by Deep Blue. That was the only move it considered, more or less. And after FG, F takes G5. Well, obviously HG5. What have we got? Knight G4, Knight C4. Sorry, is the one. Hitting with tempo the queen and freeing the queen to attack g5. Garry's sneaky queen c1 coming to the fore there. But knight e5 and now g6. So Yasser says, now the imbalance of bishop and pawn for rook convinced Deep Blue that its middle game position wasn't too bad. This is a fair judgment, however all endgame positions are lost. Middle games have a habit of evolving to endgames, and Garry knew that victory was to be had. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Not sure about that. Feng-hsiung says that Deep Blue did not particularly like its position. The engines think that that black is pretty okay, but there's a very key decision to be made here, or a very key concept to be understood, and it's actually that this queen has to be redeployed. It has to be redeployed to the king side. Now actually I think that Deep Blue tried to do that but just didn't do it in a very effective manner. The move that you want to play either now or on the next move is to play the move rook d7 with the idea of bringing the queen back d8 to g5. So for example, after c4 we go bishop f3, c5 queen d8 takes, and we're going to come around into g5. This is one game of dragon against stockfish that ended in a draw. Well, still vaguely unclear, that one. But we're going to see a few more games where this queen just by itself actually just goes automatically around. For example, there's also here if bishop c3, just like Garry played, bishop f3, queen e1, and then queen d8, and just bringing the queen round to g5 covers everything and also threatens some dangerous checks as well. It's a key point to defending that. So bishop c3 was played by Garry, and Garry was glowing after the game. He would like this very much, defending d2. The engines like queen e1, which I kind of prefer somehow, because the problem with bishop c3 is that you can no longer play this move queen e1 to c3 and get a battery somehow. It's a nice defensive move, but it does sort of restrict white's attacking possibilities. I mean, queen e1, h5, and then g4 is the engine preference nowadays, and it's a very dynamic move here. Actually, with g4, this queen can go both ways now. Can really anything can happen here. So takes. Knight g4, f6 is the engine line. Knight f2. The funny thing is that in this position, the engines are just saying, draw, agreeing a draw, and I have to keep on moving them forwards to play. So f7, knight g4 check, king h3, rook e6, knight f4. How crazy is this? Rook dd6. Just giving up that rook, just to do anything to try and get rid of this. But queen c3. Now we're coming in here. Knight f2 check, king h4, queen d8, king h5, rook d5 check, takes, and then this is a draw by perpetual. Queen d5 check with a draw by perpetual. You can't escape anywhere at all. Amazing, huh? Quite amazing, this line. But that was engine best play, modern engine best play. Queen e1 and then g4. I like this very much, actually. Just opening up the line of the queen there. So one thing that Daniel King points out is that after rook e5, this vaguely looks strong. Again, this discovered attack somehow, hitting h6, looking at knight f6, but we actually just go queen d4 in this position, and knight e5, queen e5 is really strong. You're attacking this rook on a1, and you're also attacking g3. If you go knight f6, queen h6, king e7, you're just escaping here. You can't capture this black king, and meanwhile the white king's feeling the danger eventually. So very interesting there. But Garry played the slightly slower bishop c3. And now this is where it starts to go a bit wrong for Deep Blue, or sort of gets on the wrong track. Now, interestingly enough, I mean, Yasser says, well, c5 was way better to get the queen across to the king side, and also have the idea of knight g6 to destroy the pawns. And as so often with the human grandmasters, that's a sensible comment, absolutely. But it does fail tactically, because we've got this lovely move knight c4. Hitting the queen, hitting the knight as well, and after knight c4, then queen h6 is just completely winning for white. Why is c5 such a bad move? You'd say, well, you know, why wouldn't after rook d6, which is the engine's favourite move, why wouldn't knight c4 work now? Well, there's queen to f2 here, attacking queen g2. You know, c5 blocked the queen's entry point. That's the reason why knight c4 is bad in this position. But yeah, rook d6, queen e1, and then queen d8. You know, again, we're doing exactly what Yasser wanted. We can get rid of the pawn that way. And we're bringing the queen round to the king side, but just in a much more elegant way. No, the queen comes to g5, and it's anybody's game. But this move, bishop c3, has been a little bit slow somehow. So yeah, Deep Blue played queen b5, and Feng-hsiung says that Deep Blue was willing to trade the queens because its king was less safe. But Garry also had two connected passed pawns that could become very valuable in the endgame phase. The ability to express this endgame feature existed in the chess hardware but was not in use. The code was written by Joe, amazing guy this Joe, but the code wasn't active until we had a rest day after game 2 to check it out. Again, you know, amazing. It just made me, you know, sort of, I really noticed this somehow because, you know, when you ask the Stockfish guys nowadays, oh, did you see that game where Stockfish played a bad move? You know, are you going to use that to improve Stockfish? They always say, yeah, you know, one game, you can't tell anything from one game. We only deal with, you know, with Fish Test, you know, which is millions of games. That's when we really take notice. But here, you know, every single game, stuff is being tweaked and adjusted. It's quite, yeah, just shows how engine chess has changed. I mean, actually, I don't think that the engines necessarily feel that the exchange of queens is terrible for black. But yeah, it's I think Deep Blue was really had some very wrong expectations about what Garry was going to do. That's what really happened. Queen e1 is actually what the engines wanted, and now they actually want to give up the material like this. And just play this position. I mean, this, to be honest, this looks really horrible for black to me. But the engines were, well, Stockfish was managing to hold a draw in such positions. Looks kind of horrible though. Garry played queen f1, obviously happy to exchange off queens and reduce the danger. And yeah, here h5 was the best move. Just allowing this exchange of queens, which would be, yeah, would give black some extra counterplay here. Also hold back the pawns, and not easy for white to get through. And you know, by getting a pawn on c4 after this move h5, you're actually really restricting this white knight. C takes b5 will stop the knight getting to c4. h5 is stopping the knight from getting to g4. And black's idea is actually to follow up as well with knight g4 here and just exchange off the knights. Deep Blue didn't play it so badly, but queen f1 was a little bit friendly. But there is something quite fundamental that went wrong with Deep Blue here. It's namely that Deep Blue was expecting an awful lot. That bishop takes e5 and bishop f3 would happen. That, you know, white would liquidate this this stronger piece structure of blacks in order to get rid of that advanced bishop. I mean, it makes you kind of wonder. Reminded me very much actually of game 2 of the first match, where, you know, Deep Blue was very keen on putting a bishop on an advanced outpost, and, you know, the fact that Deep Blue in 1997 was still, you know, looking for white to give up the two bishops, give up this glorious dark squared bishop in order to get rid of an advanced bishop on an outpost, made me wonder whether that bug was really removed already somehow. But Garry was not thinking about that at all. He just played the move king g1. And yeah, the best move for black here was to play knight g4, f6, rook e6, bishop h3, and then give up material like this, bishop g6. And well, I mean, you're going to pick up the g3 pawn here as well and go back. It looks very difficult for black to me, this position. I mean, the two bishops here, very, very nice. The king, everything's covered. Not easy to get this rook really into play and hitting the black position. But yeah, I do like white quite a lot here. But Stockfish was managing to hold some of those draws. But Deep Blue played King F8, and again expecting Bishop E5 and Bishop F3 here. But Garry was not in the mood for that at all. What Garry did was play this move Bishop H3, and after this the engines jump to 4.83. And what's the key point about it? The key point is that after knight G4, we're not going to give up the knight on E3, this wonderful knight which is protecting all these pawns. We're going to play Bishop G4, HG, and Rook F2, and then play Rook H2 and just invade like this. Just incredible. So the whole game turns around completely, just because Deep Blue was expecting white to liquidate this and get rid of that bishop on F3, and Garry couldn't care less. He just leaves that bishop isolated on its own and just goes about somehow increasing the power of this dark squared bishop. So B5 was played by Deep Blue, King F2, King G7. It's kind of, yeah, Rook D6 would probably be better, just to take on G6, try and loosen things up that way. But Deep Blue didn't defend very well, really. G4, again, I think this was a move that it certainly missed until very, very late on, I think. It only saw G4, actually, I can see in the logs, very late whilst it was considering King G7. Before then, it hadn't seen this idea at all. And basically, I mean, you're just opening everything up, right? I mean, you're just opening up the king side, and you're going to be able to get the rook involved once you open the G file, maybe even get the rook to the H file. This black king's in just huge problems. And yeah, now the bishop's really coming into his own. With the queen's exchange, this bishop is doing a gorgeous job of defending D2 and also attacking E5. So King H6, Rook G1 played by Garry, GH5 was also very strong. Takes, bishop takes G4, Knight G4, Knight G4, Rook D5, Rook D5, F6. Then there's a moment in this game now where Deep Blue played Rook D1, which was yeah, just a very bad move and lost immediately. But I mean, you know, Rook F5 check was also losing. Apparently, it was caused by a bug, and somebody later made some strange claim that the Kasparov team had got completely put off by this bug and spent ages trying to work out what it was, and that it put Garry off for the rest of the match. But yeah, Garry refutes that suggestion, and yeah, I can't really understand it. Just engines do odd stuff anyway when they're much worse, so it can happen. After Rook F5 check, we just go King E2, and then we just go you know, F7 and G7, and it's just a complete win, really. So nothing too terrifying about that. So Rook D1 played, G7, and Deep Blue resigned. Garry makes a very typical comment for him. I did a video series with him, and I said to him there was one game between Magnus Carlsen and Napier where something odd had happened. And I said, Garry, what was it? And he just thought for a little while about the game, and then bang, he was on there. He knew exactly what had happened. I think it was with a knight, actually, that had gone to a strange place. And here he says, remarkably, none of my pieces had ever crossed out of my half of the board. Incredible, just to defeat Deep Blue without ever any piece crossing the fourth rank. Yasser said, an excellent effort by Kasparov. My audience was left breathless. Garry was beaming. His first words, accompanied with a very happy smile, were, "It's already different from Philadelphia, where he'd lost the first game." And yeah, Daniel King said, some of the machine's moves were very hard to explain. Its play reminds me of a little of a skillful coffeehouse player who plays quickly and carelessly, then strong enough to repair the damage he's inflicted upon himself. Although it had patches of good play, it shows no significant advance on its form from last year in Philadelphia. So yeah, you know, I mean, the humans were pretty optimistic about it, and Garry, you know, recounts. Well, I think, was it Frederick Friedel in a lovely BBC Sounds interview on with Kirsty Walk. I think he said that Garry and his team, and of which Frederick was a part, were sort of saying it hasn't improved at all. I mean, have they really not managed to improve it any more than this? But I think that was kind of harsh somehow, because I think what you can say is that actually, obviously, it was a bit inherent to the way that Garry was playing. But Deep Blue made a lot of the running in this game, which when you think about games 5 and game 6 from the 1996 match, it wasn't able to do at all. It just reached a position and then seemed to sort of tread water. But this move G5, okay, you can say that it's weakening, but it's making stuff happen. Now we've already seen in the principal variations it was looking to play H5, H4, and I mean this move G4 later on. You can definitely you can hate it. I mean, I understand that. But it's making stuff happen, and well, obviously, I mean, this idea bishop e7 to g5, f5 as well, e4. Deep Blue's really forcing the play, forcing the confrontation, and Garry's sort of having to react. So, yeah, Feng-hsiung said that they weren't too pessimistic after the game. They felt that Deep Blue had played, really, really well. And Joel Benjamin said that, well, if Garry has to cope with this sort of thing all through the match, he's not going to be able to cope. He's not going to have the stamina to cope with it. And I think that was a very prescient comment, really. And so I mean, both sides happy after the first game. Very, very interesting game. And I think looking back at it, obviously with hindsight and all of that, but I think that you can really say that in this game Deep Blue played showed in a position that maybe wasn't a type of opening that wasn't necessarily going to be its forte, an amorphous type of position. Thought it played very well. I can't imagine the 1996 Deep Blue playing as well as this. So that set the match up nicely, and now we head to game 2, which has become one of the most famous games, I think, in chess of all time. So if you're enjoying this video, hope you are, then join me for that, because we've got masses of really new and amazing stuff to look at. Thanks for watching.